Good evening, magical experimenters. Tonight I am doing a video on how to work with house spirits and spirits of the land, because this was something where I'd promised to do that particular video a little while back, and I haven't gotten to it yet. So I thought, well, why not? Now's a good time as any. And actually, in a sense, I'm doing this video too because one of my goals over the course of this next year is to actually start a series of books on how to work with different types of spirits. So, this is a good reminder to me to really to follow through on that commitment. It's something I've decided to work on after I get one more book in the How Magic Works series wrapped up. So, with that in mind, let's talk about how to work with house spirits and spirits of the land. So um, I found this question interesting because, of course, the person was asking, was asking about it, and and the way that I look at it is there's a couple different angles that I look at it in this way. First is that you have the opportunity to work with actual spirits of your house, like the spirit of the house itself. Like each home has its own living, breathing space about it, if you will. And I feel like when we live in a home, we don't always necessarily recognize that. We kind of take it for granted. But the home that you live in is definitely a space that can speak to you and through you. Um, the place that I lived up until a year ago, actually, I lived for like a decade there, definitely had its own presence and everything. And the place that I live in now does too. It's interesting kind of to compare the two because the one space was like a duplex. So, like I lived in one half of the place and somebody else lived in the other half. And so it never really felt like our space so much as it was shared space. And sometimes we didn't necessarily like who we were sharing the space with. Whereas the place that I'm in now, it's my own space, it's our own space. We don't share any walls with anyone else, and it feels like our own space. It's something where we've really put a fair amount of work into this place already. And even like the ritual room that is also my bedroom is very much shaped in that context, because when I'm looking around at it right now as I'm talking to you guys, I look at all the art and things that I have on the wall, just the magical stuff, and it's like this is a very intentional crafting of this specific space. And so when I think about it, I'm actively working with the spirit of this house. Now, there's also the reality, of course, that you also can have your own. You can also, bring your own spirits with you. And so, like, if you were to come into my home, you would see like an altar to, for example, to Elephant and to my work with Elephant. But you would also see, like, I have a couple of gargoyle statues on the outside, guardians for the one door. And again, those have been placed there very intentionally. They're there to protect us. They're spirits that they're spirits I've worked with for a long time and have had a long time. I got these statues a long time ago, and basically and imbued them with actual magical entities that I created for the purposes of bringing those statues to life. But then there's also just the actual land spirits, the fairies, the elementals, the nature spirits. And these are spirits that are always there and around us. Like I will sometimes go and walk outside my home and really just kind of soak in the actual environment. And one of the things that I try to do is to commune with the spirits of the land. When I talk about elemental spirits, I'm talking about, of course, the primary, like the elemental spirits of like earth, air, fire, water, and spirit. But I also, as you may know, have also taken a different stance on elemental spirits. And so I think of an elemental spirit as also being anything that moves you and works with you in a very elemental manner. So like I would consider love to be an elemental energy, and that there could be elementals of love. The same for emptiness or hatred or anything else along those lines. And so, we can work with those types of spirits as well. But when we're talking about land spirits, we really are working with the actual nature spirits. So one of the things that my family likes to do is actually put out an offering every full moon to the nature spirits. And so they'll have like a, we'll have a bit of honey, and we'll actually do an offering to the spirits of the land as a way to honor them. And sometimes we'll do it even outside of that specific time, because it can be a good thing, to take the time to acknowledge those spirits. You're sharing this land with those spirits. You are part of that thing. And so I think it's very important to recognize and honor that connection, instead of just assuming that it's automatic, something to be taken for granted, which I think a lot of people do. I mean, you look at how people kind of live on the land they live in, and they try and shape the land in a way, and they don't necessarily connect with the spirits of the land. And so for me, making those offerings on a regular basis can be very important. I even like to make offerings sometimes of like personal effects, so like a bit of hair or nails or whatever else, kind of a connection with the land spirits in that particular way, because I think it's a useful way to really connect with them. And to give something of myself, it's kind of an ongoing thing where I have given them some of my essence, some blood, saliva, cum, etc. And so hair and nails and all that just kind of goes hand in hand with that. It's offering something of that personal essence, and returning it to the land in a very real sense, and at the same time connecting with those spirits in a very meaningful way, because I'm choosing to make that personal connection and offering of myself. The other way that I like to the other way that I really like to work with the spirits of the land is to actually walk the land. So one of the things that I recommend doing is, when you get a chance, is to go out for a walk. You can walk in your neighborhood, for example. You can certainly go hiking and things like that, but really go out and walk the land and get to know the land. When I lived in Ohio, for example, I first moved there to go to my to go to school there for a while. One of the things I did is I walked the area, and of course it helped at the time that I didn't have a car. I had to walk anyway, so I'd walk to the grocery store and all that. But I did a lot of walking, and I walked the land and got to know the land, and I got to know the spirits of the land, because I could feel not just the human interaction there, but the way the spirits themselves connected to the land. And of course, I very intentionally connected with them, again, making personal offerings, because I thought it was a very important thing to do. And I've done the same thing in Portland, and actually with like the Columbia Gorge. So one of the things that I did is, with my wife, is we traveled to the through the Columbia Gorge, and we actually went on this to find these specific locations, where then we made specific offerings to the spirit of, she who watches, which is the spirit of the Columbia Gorge. And we made these offerings really, really just with the intention of connecting with the gorge and connecting with the spirit of the land, and offering of ourselves, in a very real and raw sense, to this nature spirit. And what I found fascinating about it, again, was how then the spirit like showed up in our dreams, and the spirit shows up from time to time whenever we're certainly traveling along the Columbia Gorge. But we, for all intents and purposes, by living in Portland, we live close to the gorge anyway, so the spirit will show up sometimes. And of course, we've made it a point to go and do a pilgrimage of sorts every so often to one of the sites that we went to, as a way to just honor that spirit and honor our connection to it. And again, I think that's an important thing. So, walking the land, getting to know the spirits that way, but also going and visiting, areas of the land. The other thing I also recommend really is finding some way, some cause that you can take on to support, your connection with the land. What I mean by that is like actually doing some volunteer work. And that volunteer work could be that, maybe you go and you help clean up a stretch of road or land. It could be something else. In my particular case, my volunteer work is focused on working at Free Geek, which is a place where they do electronic recycling. And you might say, well, what does that have to do with the land, Taylor? And my answer to that is, well, by going there and helping to recycle these electronics, like, what am I really doing? I'm also helping to keep these things out of the environment, and I'm showing the land, my dedication and service to that work. So I think that's really important too. And it's one of the things that we don't really see talked about a lot in, the occult or pagan community. But I think, if you're going to if you're going to really connect and work with spirits, then you should put your money where your mouth is, so to speak. And what I mean by that is that, it's all fine and well to do magical workings, but let's also take that extra step and actually do something more meaningful than just that. Let's actually connect with the land in a meaningful way. Let's do work around the land, to honor the land, to honor the spirits that we choose to work with. And so for me, taking care of the land means, being willing to maybe take some time and effort out of my normal routine and do something meaningful because it matters to me and it helps the land in a very meaningful way. So I recommend doing that too, because I think that's an important offering that you can make. And I think really what it comes right down to is that when you work with spirits, regardless of what types of spirits that you work with, whether it's angelic or demonic or elementals or fairies or all of the above or pop culture spirits for that matter, it comes down to like, what is the sincerity that you bring to that relationship? What are you willing to give to that relationship? Not just what do you want from the relationship. So many people approach working with spirits from a place of take, take, take. Like, I want this from the spirit. I want that. I want the spirit to do this and that. And it's a very human centric perspective, really, that tends to ignore the reality that, we're really just a small part of this greater universe and that we're not above it. We act like we're above it a lot of the times. And I've been guilty of that. I'm not going to point the finger at you and not admit that there's some fingers pointing back at me, right? I've been guilty of that sometimes, but I don't know, that perspective has changed a lot for me. And a large part of the reason why it's changed is because I look at the impact and the effect that I could have on this world, and I ask myself, well, how can I do better than that? And what can I do? And I think that, a huge part of that is like, what is our relationship with the spirits? Like, what are we willing to give in order to get, like, if you want to get something from the spirits, what are you willing to give in return? And for me, I've always on some level known that it has to be a reciprocal relationship. So, I've always given something of myself, but that's become even more intentional over the last year or so, because I've really been examining carefully this relationship with spirit and asking myself, what is the right kind of relationship? What am I really giving in order to get? If I want to get something, what am I willing to do in return? And what am I willing to sometimes just do for the sake of doing it, and to give, not necessarily for anything in return, but simply because it's the right thing to do? And I think that last part is really important too, because if we're going to do spiritual work, we're going to do magical work, sometimes we have to be willing to examine what we're willing to give of ourselves, not because we're going to get something in return, but because it's simply the right thing to do. So I leave you with that thought, and some ideas here on how you can work with elementals and land spirits. And again, feel free to comment if you want. And thank you for watching, and see you next week.